Welcome to my video, guys. We're going to do a bit of an overclocking on this computer. This has got an i5 2500K processor in it, and it's an Asus deluxe motherboard. It's also got a GTX 970 graphics card and 8 GB of memory. So we're just going to have a quick go at overclocking. But before we do that, we need to look at the performance of the PC. I'm just going to run a very quick test to find how fast it is before we do some overclocking, to make sure we're moving in the right direction. Right, so a couple of the programs I tend to use, one's Hardware Monitor and one's CPU-Z. So with these two programs I can do most of what I want straight away and get close to a reasonable overclock. What I tend to do then is run more demanding programs to make sure that it's 100% stable, and run it 24/7 and make sure we don't get any crashes. Right, so it's an i5 2500K as can be shown here. Let's have a quick look. So it's got the energy saving features all on, and it's currently running at 1.6 GHz as can be shown here. Right, so before I run the test, I want to make sure that the CPU is running roughly at 0 or very close to it, to make sure it's an accurate test. Windows could be doing something in the background. Just want to make sure it settles down first. Right, so as you can see here, the clocks, at the minute it's running at 1600 MHz, and the turbo boost on this processor out of the box is 3.7. Right, so I'm just going to do a bench on it, just using CPU-Z. This is quite good because it's quite fast, to see roughly what sort of scores we're getting. So let's just go bench, and it will do multi-core, and it will do a single thread to make sure we're getting the same performance that we should be getting. Right, so I think it's stopped now, so I'll just write this down so I can compare it to when we overclock it. Right, so we've got 341 for single core and 1335.9. Right, let's just do a quick stress test on the CPU. What I'm looking for now is I want to see what sort of voltage this runs to in its sort of stock arrangement. So I'm just going to stress the CPU. Right, so it looks like the V core at the top is 1.24 volts. So this is with the processor flat out. It's running at 1.24 volts. So at the top here, this is basically what the motherboard is giving the CPU. So it's 1.24 volts. Now, further down, if we look here, it's got i5 2500K. This is what the processor is asking for. So it's asking for 1.26, and we're giving it 1.24. So there's a little bit of voltage droop in there, which is probably a good thing in most circumstances. Okay, and we're running at 3.4 GHz, just over. I think this is supposed to run at 3.3 actually, but all core 3.4 is probably okay. Okay, right, let's stop the test. I'm going to restart the PC, and we're going to do the first overclock. It's always good when you're overclocking to do a slight overclock and a slight overclock. You don't want to jump straight in to a massive overclock. So all I'm going to do now is hit the delete key. Right, so now we're into the BIOS. As you can see here, i5 2500K at 3.3. So we actually got a little bit more than that out of it. On the first test we got 3.4, which was pretty good. Right, so I'm going to go into the AI tweaker. So it's got the target CPU mode 3.7, memory 1600. Right, so I'm going to change this to manual. I'm going to leave, there's something strange on this motherboard. If I leave this set at 100, for some reason it doesn't run the memory at 1600 megahertz, it runs it at 1333. So I just tweak it a little bit to 100.2 and it doesn't make it unstable at this. If you go too high on this, it'll become unstable. What we got here? Right, so here I want to go by core, cannot adjust in operating system, and now I can type in what I want. So I think we're going to try for 42 and see what happens. So we're going to go from 3.7 turbo speed to 4.2 all core. I'm going to leave this set to auto. What else we got? We've got load line calibration in here, and I've got it set to medium at the minute. So what that does is under load, it will give it slightly more voltage than it will if it's set to auto. Auto or regular, it won't give it anything. This is giving it, if you read here, it's giving it a bit more voltage, which is what we want. Right, so what else we got? We've got the DRAM voltage, and again what I tend to do here is it should be running at 1.5 volts, and I'll give it a fractionally more, 1.525. I tend to find that when a computer crashes, it's usually through the DRAM voltage, which is here. The rest of them I tend to set to auto, so we're all on auto everywhere. The CPU voltage is on manual mode at the minute, and it's just set to auto. So what we can do, we can go into offset mode. We've got a sign, a plus sign. So if I go here now, I can type in what I want, for example. So now it's going to give the processor, so it's going to run on auto, but it's going to give the processor always another 0.01. And I'm going to leave all the energy saving features engaged. I want them to still work. I still want the processor to down clock. I'm not after the maximum overclock. I'm after a decent overclock. And let's see if this see if this works. Right, so we're going to go to 4.2. So I'm going to go exit, save changes and reset. Yes. And we'll see if it'll boot. Right, so we're back into Windows, and I want to see what the computer's doing. So I'm going to run hardware monitor again, hopefully. And I'm going to run the CPU Z again. So at 4.2 we've managed to get into Windows. The VCore is set at 1 or 0.99 something, so the energy saving features are still working. And if you look here now at the clocks, it's actually been running at 4.2 when we booted it up. Right, so let's see if it's stable. It looks like it's going a bit higher now, 1.27, and it looks like the processor's now asking for 1.34 volts. You have to be careful on your overclocks that this doesn't go too high. And on this particular processor, I probably don't want to go much higher than about 1.37-ish. So that's sort of my limit that I don't want to go beyond, really. But this is what the processor's asking for. And at the top, this is what the motherboard's actually giving it. So it's not as high as this bottom figure. So under load, we're going to see what happens to this figure. So let's do a bench on it. So it looks like it's staying now at 1.27 volts, which is not that high really for this sort of overclock. I expect to go a bit higher than that. Okay, so it looks like we've done that. We don't necessarily know it's stable yet, but we know we can do this. So we've got 420 and 1579. Yeah, so it's gone up a bit. So if we were to compare that to a different CPU, what have we got in here? Something that's similar. So the i7 variant, so the i7 variant gets 1686 and we're on 1579, and we're on the i5, but our single core speed is faster than what the i7 would normally run at now. So I think the goal would be to try and get our multi-core speed up to the i7 multi-core speed of 1686. I think at the minute we're going to try and overclock it a bit more. Right, so we're back into the BIOS, and I was noting that the processor's asking for more voltage than we're actually giving it, so you have to be careful that you're stable if that's the case. I think I'm going to give it slightly more voltage, and we're going to up the clock speed as well. When you up the clock speed and it's set to auto, the system will give it more voltage anyway, so you just need to be a little bit careful. Right, so let's go to 45. Right, so now we're asking it to go to 45, which is 4.5, so it's a little bit quicker. Let's see what else we can do. Load line calibration still on medium. We're on offset mode. Let's change this to 0.05. I'm going to go a bit more on the voltage. And I'm expecting it now to, because we're going to 4.5, I'm expecting the system to want to give it more voltage, and also we're adding more voltage on top of it of 0.5. I'm not sure this is going to be stable. I've never overclocked on this board like this before, so we'll try it and see what happens. Okay, so we've made it to Windows again, which is always a good sign. Right, so you can see at the top now of the V-core, we now got 1.36, so it's now shot up a little bit. That's probably about the most I would want to go to. If you look here, the processor looks like it's asking for 1.35, so we're actually now a lot closer to what the processor is asking for. This is not under load properly yet though, so we need to check this. But if you look now, the core clock went to 4.5. It's actually on 4.5 now, so it's actually running at 4.5. Let's have a quick look in Task Manager. So yeah, so again here you can see the speed. It went to 4.33. So it's a lot faster, this is, than what it should be running at all core. All core it should be 3.3, and we've got over 4.3 now looking at that. Right, so let's check what voltages we've got running through it. Let's run CPU Z and we'll see if it crashes. This is only the first program that I'd run. I'd probably run Cinebench R20 or something next to make sure we're 100% stable for a lot longer duration. The interesting thing is this is supposed to be a 95 watt processor, and I suspect that we're only using around 95 watts even in this overclock state, which is very, very good. Right, so let's bench the CPU. Okay, so we're running a lot faster now.
Got to.
Right, so looking at that, at this overclock, we've now got an all-core speed the same as the i7 variant, the i7 2600K, without hyper-threading. So we're doing that because all the cores are running a lot faster now. So we've gone from originally 341 single core to 455 single core. So that's pretty good, if that's stable. I'm just going to do a bit more of a stress on it, and we're going to see what the voltage goes to. I'm also going to check the voltage in this CPU Z, because this doesn't seem to be changing very accurately sometimes. Let's stress the CPU. Let's go back on CPU. Right, so this is saying here 1.35 volts. And if you look here, the processor is actually asking, the processor's asking for 1.35 volts, and we're giving it 1.35 volts. So we can double check this in CPU Z here. So on this particular one, it says 1.35 volts, and we've got a core speed of 4.5. Temperatures look pretty good. If you have a quick look at the temperatures for the processor, the temperatures at the minute are just under 50 degrees C, but it's quite cold in this room at the minute, so that's probably helping us by about 10 degrees C. Actually, if you look now, it's been running for a couple of minutes. All the Windows apps are probably stopped. We're getting an all-core speed of 1785, which is actually faster than the 2600K by a little bit. And we're still at 50 degrees C. So I think at the minute, this is running flat out. It's running at 4.5 gigahertz, and it's running at 1.36 volts. So I'm reasonably happy with that. I'm happy to run that 24/7 at that. I think that would be okay from a processor point of view and a degradation point of view. I don't think the processor would get harmed running at this speed or at this voltage. As long as you're keeping the temperatures under about 70 degrees C, there shouldn't be any issues. So what I'll do now is I'd probably run a couple of different more programs to make sure it's totally stable. Let's just run something with graphics in it as well, just to give it a different processor load to make sure it's going to be stable. So just benchmarking this at the minute, and we're getting around 100 frames per second, which on an old computer, that's not bad. The monitor's actually only 60 hertz anyway, so anything over 60 frames is, you know, we're not going to use anyway, so I'm just after 60 frames. So the next thing would be to run a few more programs for a lot longer and make sure we're 100% stable. If it's not 100% stable, there's different things we can do. I can up the voltage a little bit more. So at the minute I'm offsetting the voltage by 0.5 to make sure the voltage the processor is asking for is actually getting. Potentially the processor can run under that voltage and it can still be stable. So we could try lowering the voltage until it crashes, and then we know the point at which the system's unstable. And if we're 0.3, 0.4 volts above there, then we shouldn't be crashing. Also, running the voltage as low as possible, the temperatures run as low as possible. But at the minute, I'm really happy with the temperatures of the system, the temperature of the processor. Everything looks good at the minute, even at this voltage. If it wasn't stable at this voltage, I could up that voltage a little bit more. So instead of 1.35, 1.36, I could up it to 1.37, 1.38, or you can choose to downclock it to 3.4, for example, to get the stability. So there's two different ways you can run it. You can either run it faster or with more voltage, or you can run it slower with less voltage, depending on what you're happy running that PC at voltage wise. But I think on this processor, around that sort of voltage should be okay 24/7, I would think. Okay, thank you guys for watching my video.